What if Neville Longbottom was the chosen one instead of Harry Potter? Hey brother. Possibly the most pivotal moment in the entire history of the wizarding world happened on October 31st, 1981, when Voldemort attacked the Potters and tried to kill baby Harry. And this moment is massive for two big reasons. First of all, it's the night that Voldemort first lost his powers, but it's also because of the prophecy of the Chosen One, which stated, "The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches. Born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the seventh month dies, and the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not, and either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord will be born as the seventh month dies." And thus, in attacking baby Harry, Voldemort, unbeknownst to himself, marked Harry as his equal, and, as Dumbledore says, handpicked the man most likely to finish him, handing him unique, deadly weapons. But as we all know, it didn't have to be Harry who became the Chosen One. There was another option. Neville Longbottom. His parents were also members of the Order of the Phoenix, had defied Voldemort 3 times, and Neville was born at the end of July, and yet, for his own reasons, Voldemort chose Harry instead of Neville. But what if he'd chosen differently? Harry himself wonders this very thing in The Half-Blood Prince. Had Voldemort chosen Neville, it would be Neville sitting opposite Harry, bearing the lightning-shaped scar and the weight of the prophecy. Or would it? Would Neville's mother have died to save him as Lily had died for Harry? Surely she would. But what if she'd been unable to stand between her son and Voldemort? Would there have been no Chosen One at all? An empty seat where Neville now sat, and a starless Harry who would have been kissed goodbye by his own mother, not Ron's? All wonderful questions, Harry. You would have a bright future as a theory writer. Would Alice or Frank Longbottom have interceded? Would that matter? Would there be a Chosen One at all? Would Harry still have been attacked anyway? Or would James and Lily have been tortured like Neville's parents usually are? Or even worse, would Voldemort have just won the war that night? Believe you me, guys, this is a big one, and obviously changing the main character changes the story a lot. But today, we begin to answer, what if Neville was the Chosen One?
I'll fight you!
But I am the Chosen One.
Okay, so what would it mean for Voldemort to choose Neville instead of Harry? Well, first we need to consider why Voldemort chose Harry in the first place. It wasn't just because he despised the Potters more than the Longbottoms, or because he had more access to Harry, or just didn't know that Neville existed. As ever with Voldemort, it is much more vain. Between the two babies, one was a half-blood, Harry, and one was a pureblood, Neville. And according to Voldemort's own pure blood mantra, you'd think Neville would have been the obvious choice. If purebloods are truly superior to other magical beings, then Neville is obviously the greater threat, right? But Voldemort doesn't actually believe any of that. That's just his rally call. Instead, he believes that he is the most important, and he, unbeknownst to his followers, is a half-blood, and therefore he chooses Harry and recognizes him as the real threat. But what if he did choose differently? What if he actually believed what he says, that purebloods are superior to half-bloods, and chose Neville instead? Well, we know that Dumbledore knows that both Harry and Neville are candidates for the prophecy because he tells Harry, "Sybil's prophecy could have applied to 2 wizard boys. One, of course, was you. The other was Neville Longbottom." And of course we know how Dumbledore is planning to hide the Potters from being the target of the prophecy, which, in case you're wondering, he's already got that in motion before Snape reveals to Dumbledore that Voldemort intends to kill Lily Evans' son. So the scene where Snape arrives to plead with Dumbledore to protect Lily and James and Harry, Dumbledore already has. Basically, he uses the situation to manipulate Snape into switching sides to promise to do something he's already done. Because don't forget, of all people, Dumbledore already knew the prophecy and already knows that Harry and Neville are the candidates for it and is already hiding them. And specifically, we know he's hiding the Potters with the Fidelius charm, so I think it stands to reason that he's trying to hide the Longbottoms in the exact same way. We also know that Dumbledore offers to be the Potters' secret keeper, but they ultimately decline in favor of Sirius, who then later convinces them to to go with Peter, who then gets them all killed. But I'm thinking the Longbottoms just took Dumbledore up on his offer, so he's their secret keeper. Meaning the Longbottom secret is significantly more secure than the Potters, because there is no chance at all that Dumbledore is giving them up. But so what would that mean for the Potters? Because in a world where Voldemort has determined ahead of time that Neville is in fact the bigger threat, does that mean that they're safe, that they wouldn't be targeted at all? Well, I think they're maybe a little less likely to be murdered, but I don't think any less likely to be attacked. After all, they still would have made Peter their secret keeper, and even before the prophecy was in play, they would have evaded Voldemort 3 times, which, if you do some math, means that they had already been under attack 3 times. Plus, Voldemort knowing that both boys are candidates and knowing that both families are members of the Order of the Phoenix, I'm thinking he would take any opportunity available to him at all to try and torture information out of the Potters as to the whereabouts of the Longbottoms. Thus, and unfortunately, Peter's secret keeper information is still of extreme value to Voldemort, and I think he still tells them where they are, but I don't think it is Voldemort himself who personally attends to them. Which I know sounds dumb, like if he thinks there are 2 candidates who could fulfill the prophecy, that why wouldn't he just tie off loose ends and go ahead and kill Harry to begin with? But remember, Voldemort is the kind of absolutely stupid arrogant that just thinks he knows better. If he, Voldemort, believes that Neville is the subject of the prophecy, then zero part of him is concerned that Harry is any threat at all. And so it would be Death Eaters who would attend to the Potters instead to try and torture information out of them. Which is bad news for the Potters for a couple of reasons, because 1, they don't know where the Longbottoms are, so they couldn't tell them if they wanted, which they wouldn't anyway, because the Potters are awesome. But 2, according to the rules of the Fidelius Charm, the secret has to be given willingly and cannot be tortured out of you, so it's all really a moot point. But of course, that doesn't really matter to the Death Eaters, who don't mind torturing people for basically no reason. Plus, even in the main story, Bellatrix tortures the Longbottoms to the point of insanity, and that's after Voldemort had fallen. This time, however, Voldemort is still at large, so I think the outcome is largely the same, except for one pretty major change. I suspect, and for the sake of symmetry, since we're flip-flopping these stories, it is Bellatrix who is sent in to do the torturing. Which means, of course, that, well, there's absolutely no mercy to be had, but also that it is Bellatrix who Snape will appeal to ahead of time to try and spare Lily Evans' life, because, of course, Snape is still in love with her. Bellatrix, who is unreasonable at the best of times, does take this under consideration, thinking to herself, well, it's probably good if Snape owes me a favor. And so Bellatrix attacks the Potters, and while she might not intend to harm or kill Lily going in, there's just no way Lily doesn't fight back. Especially if James is there being tortured right in front of her and she thinks Harry is about to be harmed, like, she's gonna get in there, and once she does, Bellatrix isn't gonna hold back at all. But no matter how much pain Bellatrix inflicts, the Potters reveal nothing about the Longbottoms. First of all, because they can't, and 2, because they never would, because they're good people. And recognizing their complete uselessness, Bellatrix kills James, but at the very least spares Lily on Snape's behalf. But as ever with Bellatrix, this is perhaps a fate worse than death, and even more cruel to Lily, whose mind is now addled, very similar to the way that Neville's parents usually are in the main story. In the main story, I think it's also worth noting that the Death Eaters, even though they torture Neville's parents, do not harm Neville himself, and so I think baby Harry also remains pretty unscathed throughout the night, but that leaves him in a very curious position. Normally, when Voldemort attacks the Potters, the backfiring Avada Kedavra spell blows up the house and breaks the Fidelius Charm. But this time, that doesn't happen. The charm is still in effect, and the only people that know about the location are the Death Eaters. So, unlike usual, it's not like Sirius can just show up and find the ruins of the house. Instead, it is Snape who comes to investigate the aftermath of the attack, and the one who finds baby Harry and Lily and rescues them, bringing them to Dumbledore, pleading for help. Obviously, Dumbledore agrees, but as per usual, traps Snape in his employ as part of the bargain. Lily ends up in St. Mungo's, and Harry ends up with his godfather, Sirius Black. Sirius, of course, doesn't end up in Azkaban this time, because even though he absolutely knows that Peter was the spy and hates him for it, there's really not a whole lot he can do about it. Because in the main story, it all kind of backfires in Peter's face. The very night he reveals himself as the spy, Voldemort also falls. But this time around, Voldemort just stays in power, and so can continue to protect Peter. But then what about Neville? He's the one this story is actually supposed to be about, right? Well, he, Frank, and Alice are of course protected by the Fidelius Charm with Dumbledore as the secret keeper, meaning that Voldemort really can't find him at all. But that has some pretty interesting repercussions, doesn't it? Because usually Voldemort falls in 1981 when he tries to attack the Potters. But if he doesn't know where Neville is, he doesn't have the chance to attack him and therefore doesn't have the chance to fall either. What Voldemort would know though, especially based on Wormtail's information, is that the Longbottoms are absolutely being concealed by the Fidelius charm and are therefore pretty much unfindable. He cannot get to Neville until such a point as Neville comes out into the open. And as we know from the main story, Voldemort is absolutely obsessed with killing the chosen one from the prophecy. As Dumbledore puts it to Harry, "Have you any idea how much tyrants fear the people they oppress? All of them realize that one day, amongst their many victims, there is sure to be one who rises against them and strikes back. Voldemort is no different. Always he was on the lookout for the one who could challenge him. He heard the prophecy and leapt into action, with the result that he not only handpicked the man most likely to finish him, he handed him uniquely deadly weapons." Voldemort is obsessed with the prophecy and horribly afraid of Neville. Voldemort knows, or at least believes, that his only path to victory is by killing Neville, and the only way he will ever get access to him is if Neville comes out into the open. And he realizes the only way in which Neville will ever reveal himself is if Voldemort can create the illusion of safety and lure Neville out of hiding when he goes to school at Hogwarts. And this lines up with the prophecy super well in terms of neither can live while the other survives. Neville can basically never leave his house as long as Voldemort is out there, and Voldemort can never really rise to power until Neville leaves his house. But beyond that, we also know that Voldemort has no issue at all with operating in extreme slow motion. If you will recall, his usual rise to power in the First Wizarding War, from when he graduates Hogwarts to when he attacks the Potters, takes, what, 36 years? I mean, what's another decade, right? Especially when you're gonna live forever, which, lest we forget, is Voldemort's goal. And so his plan is put into motion, and for the next decade, Voldemort allows a false calm to fall over the war. Sure, behind the scenes, maybe he's privately working on ways to tap deep stores of dark magic as a way to break through the Fidelius charm, but of course, he can't find any. Really, that's just a backup plan. The actual plan is to create the illusion of safety, the illusion that he, Voldemort, has vanished. And so, with no warning whatsoever, all public Death Eater activity suddenly stops. Which creates a very unusual, dangerous, and even optimistic tension within the wizarding world. Normally, Voldemort's downfall is extremely well known extremely quickly, with wizards celebrating all over the country by the following morning.
Are the rumors true?
But this time, things just stop, with no explanation at all. Rumors, whispers, worries, and hope begins to spread. Is it safe to go back outside? Is Voldemort still out there somewhere? Did his sudden disappearance have something to do with the Potters? It seemed like he vanished on the same night James was killed. And whatever happened to the Longbottoms, the powerful Aurors, Frank and Alice? They haven't been seen for weeks, and then years, and then a decade. Didn't they have a young son as well? What became of the lost Longbottoms? Could they have had something to do with Voldemort's disappearance? And of course, the longer nothing happens, the more people begin to believe it's safe again. Sure, people are nervous at first, but year after year, nothing happens and things begin to return to normal. Sure, some people remain skeptical, but the longer it goes on, the less people are willing to even tolerate that because they just don't want it to be true. But of course, as we know, Voldemort isn't gone at all. He's just biding his time, waiting for Neville to grow up and attend Hogwarts, where he can finally attack. Which brings us to year number 1. Neville Longbottom and the, say it with me, Chamber of Secrets. Oh yeah, buckle up you guys. This one is going to be fun. Make sure you tune in next week to find out what happens. How will Voldemort plan his attack on Neville, who's in the open for the very first time? Will Professor Quirrell still change sides? And what of the famous Harry Potter, who has now been raised not by the Dursleys, but instead a very proud Sirius Black, who misses his best friend, who was killed by Voldemort on the same night he seems to have disappeared? I promise we have got a lot in store for this one. We were sitting around for like 4 hours yesterday just talking about all the different plot lines we might have to cover, and I was like blowing my mind. It's gonna be so fun. Okay, so what's actually kind of interesting about this setup so far is that while Neville is preparing to go to school, Voldemort has actually yet to mark either Neville or Harry as the Chosen One, largely because he just hasn't had access to them, although to be fair, it doesn't really matter whether or not he ever sees Harry because Voldemort has already predetermined himself that Neville is the dangerous one. Regardless though, the prophecy has destined him to mark one of them as the Chosen One.
And the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not.
Now, unfortunately for Voldemort, that's the part of the prophecy he didn't hear, so he doesn't know that in attacking Neville, he will mark him as his equal. But I think it's also equally worth noting that Voldemort has already decided which one of them is his equal, which is important because, as we all know, prophecies only hold as much weight as the person who's putting stock in them. And Voldemort does. Hard. Anyway, let's get to it. After a decade of calm in the wizarding world, most people have returned to what might be considered normal life. Because while nobody knows for sure what happened to Voldemort, everyone wants to believe he's gone, and it largely appears that he is, with no dark activity happening for 10 years. But as you might expect, the wizarding community begins coming up with their own theories for what might have happened to him, partly out of curiosity, but partly also just to reassure themselves that he's really gone and not coming back. And the last big well-known attack was on the Potters, so that's where most people start with their theories. Lily Potter survived the encounter but was horribly damaged, but baby Harry remained completely unharmed. Why? Was there something special about him? Could something about him have repelled the Dark Lord? Could he have somehow sapped him of his powers? And look, I know we all know that Bellatrix is the one who attacked, but these are the kind of details that the rest of the community is just have to fill in by themselves. That is by far the most prevailing theory, which once again actually gives Harry a certain amount of fame, but it's not the only possibility for what happened to Voldemort. Others begin to theorize about the lost Longbottom. After Voldemort's disappearance, many families came out of hiding, but nobody ever saw or heard from the very popular and powerful Longbottoms ever again. Could their disappearance have been linked to Voldemort's? It was known that they were about to have a son as well, and as the theories begin to intermingle, people begin to wonder, could their son have been responsible for the fall of Voldemort? And where is he now? Well, I'll tell you where young Neville Longbottom has been. The same place he's been for the last 11 years. At home with his parents. Now, this time around, Neville has for sure had a way more desirable upbringing in that his parents are alive and well and able to care for him and provide for him. And yet, for reasons they've never been able to fully explain to him, they've never been able to leave the property. Despite the calm in the war, Dumbledore insists upon their safety and that Voldemort is still out there and very much a threat. And now, you might think that during that time, his parents or Dumbledore would have told Neville about why they're hiding away or what his potential role in the wizarding world might be, but I kinda doubt it, because we already know from the main story that Dumbledore is extremely hesitant to tell Harry this exact information, favoring instead the idea that Harry should be allowed to experience a normal childhood away from that enormous burden. Of course, in Harry's case, a normal childhood means growing up in an abusive family, so not great. Either way, Dumbledore abstains from telling Harry the truth that he is the Chosen One, even after Harry faces down Voldemort in his first year, his second year, and his fourth year when Voldemort has returned. So yeah, no, Neville definitely has no idea that he personally might be important, just that his family might be in danger. But of course, as we all know, there's no place safer than Hogwarts, so Neville is still going to school. Which again, even in the main story, after Voldemort returns, Harry is still allowed to attend Hogwarts, even though he would be 100% safe at the Dursleys. So yes, Neville's Hogwarts letter still arrives, but not by owl. It has to be hand-delivered by Dumbledore because he's the secret keeper and the only one who knows the location, so he has to hand-deliver it to him. He invites Neville personally to attend the school and informs him that he shall return the following day to escort him from the home to meet up with Rubeus Hagrid, keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts, and he will take him to get all of his school supplies. And you might wonder, why wouldn't Neville's parents just take him? And the answer is because people might recognize them. Whereas Neville, on the other hand, nobody has ever seen at all, so there's no way they can recognize him. At least not yet. Obviously, once he's at school, people will be able to recognize him, but in this case, they're able to take advantage of this precaution one last time. Plus, this immediately gives Neville a friend and an adult that he can trust at Hogwarts, which, after being isolated away from the entire world for his entire life, is something Neville probably desperately needs. So the following day, they set out for Diagon Alley, and Neville, as you might expect, is astounded by all the sights and sound of the wizarding world. That's in sound? Sound singular. In a weird way, Neville has actually been more isolated than Harry was at the Dursleys. Like, yes, the Dursleys mistreated him a lot, but Harry still went to school, interacted with other kids, even had to go to the zoo that one time. Neville, on the other hand, has almost no social interaction with anyone outside of his parents, so he's understandably shy, but takes to Hagrid immediately, because who wouldn't?
I should have told you that.
Exactly! They go about buying all of Neville's various school supplies until the final item on his list, a wand. The one thing Neville is the most excited about. He's seen his parents use them his entire life, he's even held them a few times, but now he's going to get his very own. And as usual, Hagrid drops him off at Ollivander's all by himself while he goes to get Neville a birthday present. And if you think, wow, what a coincidence, no, remember, part of what makes Neville a candidate to be the chosen one is that the prophecy specifically mentions the boy has to be born as the 7th month dies. So it is still his birthday, and he definitely deserves a gift. Also, as usual, Mr. Ollivander is just a little too upfront.
Mr. Longbottom, I wondered if I might be seeing you this year. Many rumors have circulated about your family, but I am glad to see the lost Longbottoms have returned.
You know who I am, responds Neville, who had uniquely never been recognized by another person in his entire life. Must be a really weird experience as an 11-year-old.
Well, with the resume you're rumored to have, word does tend to get around.
Neville looks confused, but hardly has any time to respond because Ollivander swiftly begins measuring every single part of his body and whisking wands from the shelves.
Now, let's see. Your father, powerful aura, favored an ash wand,
he says, handing Neville a beige wand. Give it a flick. Neville flicks the wand and rather lamely, literally nothing happens, and an absolute drop of dread sinks into Neville's stomach. Was it all a mistake? Was he not actually magical? Would he be told he had to stay back at home with his parents forever?
Not to worry,
says Ollivander, snatching the wand away and replacing it with a beechwood wand. Neville again flicks the wand, and again, nothing happens. Doubt continues to spread through Neville, but Ollivander looks unconcerned at all. Tricky customer, exclaims Ollivander, whose reaction couldn't be more opposite than Neville's. And indeed, 10 wands later, Ollivander looks absolutely bursting with excitement as he cautiously removes a dusty wand box from the shelves. Neville, on the other hand, is looking absolutely dejected, having produced little more than a single spark from the end of what he was told was an elderwood wand. Reaching forward, Neville removes the next wand from the box, and almost the moment he touches it, the room seems to fade out entirely. Red sparks fly from the end. Neville was confused, but also elated. He knew it was right. He had absolutely found the correct wand.
Curious.
What's curious?
Well, Mr. Longbottom, the phoenix that gave the core inside that wand gave another, just one other. It is curious that you should be destined for this wand when, for your whole life, you've been hiding from its brother.
Before Neville could ask what this meant, though, he heard a knock at the window and turned to see Hagrid had returned and was holding up a beautiful, snowy white owl. To round off the day, Hagrid brought Neville and his brand new owl, Treva, that's Treva, a name that just seemed to call to him, to the Leaky Cauldron for some dinner, where Neville was finally able to ask Hagrid something that had been bothering him since they left Ollivander's.
People seem to know who I am, Hagrid.
Why is that?
Well, many years ago, there was a dark wizard, and your parents were amongst the few brave enough to stand up to him.
I'm always afraid I'm going a little pirate when I do Hagrid.
But we've never left our home. How could that be? Well, he's the reason you've never left home, Neville. Word got round he was hunting down your family. Don't ask me, I don't know why. But Dumbledore knew it was important to protect you, so we did. Yarr.
Is he still out there?
Well, that's the mystery. After he went into hiding, he just disappeared. One of your classmates, Harry, his family was attacked too. His father died, and his mother, well, it's not my place to say, but after that, he was gone.
Who is he, Hagrid? Looking uncomfortable, Hagrid takes a moment before lowering his voice.
He be called Voldemort, Neville.
I'm sorry, I can't not do it.
Most seem to think he's gone, to think maybe you or Harry had something to do with it, but Dumbledore thinks he's still out there somewhere, biding his time. But no need to worry, Neville. Ain't no place safer than Hogwarts, not one.
After his day with Hagrid, Neville returns home to his parents, whom he asks similar questions to, but who he doesn't get any new information Hagrid didn't already give him. Just that Dumbledore thought they were in danger and that they still might be, so they've remained hidden to keep him safe. And as the final weeks of summer pass, Neville finds that any concerns he had about Voldemort seem to fade away as he's just so excited to be going to school. His father shows him some proper wand grips, and Neville really enjoys the companionship of Treva, his brand new owl, and it's not long at all before Dumbledore arrives again to escort him to meet Hagrid, who will take him to King's Cross and then on to Hogwarts. Hogwarts. Neville makes it through the platform and successfully boards the train and begins looking for an empty compartment before finally finding one with a single boy inside. The boy has slick-backed blonde hair and an unusual glint in his eye, but allows Neville to join him in the compartment. "I don't recognize you. Muggle-born then," says the boy in a superior tone. No. Both my parents were wizards. My name's Neville. Neville Longbottom." At the sound of his name, the boy's eyes light up, and he seems to really take in Neville fully for the first time. "It's true then. The lost Longbottoms have returned at last. I'm Malfoy. Draco Malfoy," he says, extending a hand. Neville accepts the handshake, but only warily, and rather than making eye contact, focuses on the black book held in the boy's other hand. And then, as their hands meet, Neville's whole body is filled with a horrible sinking sensation. Neville reflexively pulls his hand back, leaving Draco looking horribly offended. "Something wrong?" he asks. "Sorry, just felt a little sick," said Neville evasively, feeling that his first interaction with another boy his age is going horribly wrong. Draco still looks angry, but appears to rally and tries again. "Any idea what house you'll be in, Longbottom? My entire family's been in Slytherin, but can you imagine being in Hufflepuff? Father says it's a miracle anyone in that house can even perform basic magic." Neville, of course, has no idea what houses are or what Draco's talking about at all, but does quickly remember his trip to Ollivander's, where he could barely make anything happen when he was holding the wands. At the time, getting his wand had felt so exciting, so perfect, but now that he thought about it, had he really done anything other than stand there? As he pondered this, he suddenly realized too much time had passed since Draco had asked the question. "Well," asked Draco again, sounding much harsher than before. But before Neville can answer, the door to the compartment swung open. Neville looked up and saw a boy with black messy hair, round glasses, and what Neville decided was cool but casual clothing. He held a large toad under one arm. The boy seemed to take in the entire scene in an instant. "Thought I heard a snake. Get lost, Malfoy. Leave this boy alone." "Oh, hello, Potter," responded Malfoy with loathing in his eyes. "Nice toad." "Her name's Hedwig," said the boy, holding up the large toad. "Want to see what she can do?" But before Malfoy could respond, the boy pressed a small spot on the toad's back, and a bright white light filled the entire compartment. "I'm blind! I'm blind!" yelled Malfoy, who had indeed covered his eyes and stumbled his way out of the compartment. Neville was rubbing his eyes as well, but whatever flash the toad had made had been partially obstructed in his direction, and so he'd been saved from most of the effects. "Sorry about him. He's headed to Slytherin for sure," said the boy, now occupying the seat across from Neville. He looked to be the same age as Neville, but somehow carried himself as if he spent every single day on the train. Hedwig the toad croaked. "What is Slytherin?" said Neville, most of his vision finally returning. "Schoolhouse," said the boy. "There's 4. Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, and Slytherin." He seemed to say the last one with disgust. "Is there something wrong with Hufflepuff?" asked Neville, remembering what Malfoy had said. "What? No, of course not. Better than Slytherin, anyway. As for me, my godfather says I'm a shoo-in for Gryffindor. Where dwell the brave at heart." He seemed to be quoting someone as he said this. "I'm Harry, by the way. Harry Potter." Immediately, Neville recognized the name. That was the boy Hagrid had told him about, and his parents. Sensing he shouldn't ask about that, Neville responded with his own name instead. "I'm Neville. Neville Longbottom. I've heard of you. You're the lost Longbottom." Feeling oddly relieved that this cool boy had recognized him, Neville felt his confidence swell. "And I've heard of you. Hagrid told me about you. Aren't you supposed to have defeated Voldemort or something?" Harry gasped at hearing Neville say Voldemort's name, but looked impressed. "I was going to ask you the same thing. Apparently we were quite the formidable babies if you believe the rumors." And suddenly both boys burst out laughing at the complete absurdity of the idea. Over the next hour, Neville enjoyed talking to Harry and learning about the wizarding world. He told him how he'd been raised by his godfather and how you're not supposed to say the name Voldemort, but that he usually does anyway. After a while, a knock at the door marked the arrival of a trolley witch who was selling candy and treats. Neville barely even had a moment to start deciding what he might want from the cart when Harry jumped in and said,
"We'll take the lot."
Neville had of course experienced some wizarding candy growing up at home, but supplies of sweets were thin when nobody knew where you were. Especially when Dumbledore's the one bringing you candy, like it's all cockroach clusters and lemon drops, and that's muggle candy. I mean, come on. "These aren't real frogs, are they?" he said, examining a pack of chocolate frogs. "Nah, just chocolate, but it's really about the cards. Who've you got there?" Neville looked down and saw the friendly face of a portly witch smiling up at him in yellow robes. "Helga Hufflepuff," he read aloud. "Ooh, good one. Let's see. I've got Gryffindor. Here, you can have it. I've got a bunch of both of them. Speaking of frogs, my godfather gave me a spell to turn Hedwig here yellow. Want to see? Mind you, she's actually a toad." "Yeah?" said Neville, who was eager to see more magic. Harry pulled out his wand, pointed at Hedwig, and said, "Golden hues I do decree, turn this toad from green to glee. With magic's touch, its color shift from emerald shade to golden rift." And suddenly, the once dark green toad gleamed in the sunlight. Not just yellow, but gold. Just then, a boy with a violent shade of red hair peeked his head around the corner and said,
Wicked.
"We'll be arriving soon. I'd best get changed if I were you." Despite how the trip had started, Neville couldn't remember ever feeling happier. He had made his first friend. As they drew closer to the castle, it was time to reload their trunks. "Is this yours?" asked Harry, lobbing sweets into his bag, but just then Trevor let out a hoot and Neville reclasped the seal on her cage. Amidst the chaos, Neville, Harry, and the other first years made their way towards the boats for their first journey across the lake to Hogwarts. It is magnificent. Upon arriving at the castle, they are informed about how the sorting is going to work, and Neville is once again filled with worry that he is doomed for Hufflepuff. He awaits anxiously as student after student is sorted into one of the 4 houses until it is his turn. Said the small voice in his ear. "Difficult, very difficult. Loyalty, patience, and friendship, oh yes. But courage, so much courage, should you allow yourself to find it." Neville's mind spins with thoughts of Harry on the train, his confidence, his swagger, his ease. Surely Harry was meant for Gryffindor, but not him, not Neville, not the boy who couldn't even produce a spark with a wand. Surely he was meant for the talentless Hufflepuff, like Malfoy had said. "What's this? Hufflepuff, eh? Hufflepuff is a great house, and you would excel there for sure, but I've never been wrong before. Gryffindor!" Neville could hardly believe it. He'd even taken 2 steps towards the Hufflepuff table before realizing that all the cheers, led by some red-headed twins, were coming from the Gryffindor table. I like to imagine that as he's sitting down, he catches Harry's eye, and Harry's all like, "Finger guns!" And the rest of the ceremony goes about how you'd expect. Malfoy is swiftly sorted into Slytherin, and Harry is swiftly sorted into Gryffindor almost as fast as Malfoy, while the rest of the Gryffindor class is as usual. And Neville's first week of classes go pretty well. It turns out he's not nearly as far behind as he initially thought he might be, except for maybe Harry and some other girl named Hermione Granger, both of whom seem to excel at whatever tasks their teachers gave them. Harry and Hermione both seem to take classes very seriously. Hermione asked almost non-stop questions, while Neville noticed Harry took copious notes in a small black notebook he carried from class to class. The only class it seemed there was any trouble was potions, where, for some reason, the potions master, Professor Snape, seemed to have it absolutely out for Harry. Neville thought Harry's forgetfulness potion looked as cloudy and green as Hermione's, just like Snape said it should look, but for some reason Snape had declared it a complete disaster. For his part, Harry seemed completely unfazed by this as he ran his hands through his hair. Flying lessons this afternoon? Before flying lessons, however, was lunch, where to his own surprise, Neville looked up to see Trevor carrying a small brown package to him. "It's from my gran!" he exclaimed. Neville had never met his grandmother before, but his parents went on and on about her, about how proud she was of him and how she knew he would be a great Auror just like his father. "It's a remember-all," he said, reading the note. "So you always remember who the true enemy is." "The true enemy?" he said aloud. "I wonder who that means." "Probably Malfoy," said Harry through a mouthful of baked potatoes. "Come on, eat up. You'll need your strength for flying." Neville had never flown a broom before, but Harry assured him there was nothing to it, and sure enough, moments into their first flying lesson, it was obvious that Harry was a natural on a broomstick. Neville didn't take to the broom nearly as easily, but after a few attempts and some helpful tips from his friend, he found he was steadily cruising around the pitch, until Malfoy swerved in front of him, causing him to swing off the side of his broom and dangle upside down. Neville managed to swing himself back on top of the broom, but in the commotion had dropped his remember-all, which Malfoy was quick to swoop in and grab. To Neville's surprise, he noticed the small ball immediately fill with red smoke in Malfoy's hand. "Forget something, Malfoy," he shouts. "More like misplaced," he says, grinning at the ball and then back at Neville. From there, Harry steps in, and him and Draco have their usual face-off, complete with throwing the remember-all, Harry's diving catch, and McGonagall's immediate appointment of Harry as seeker to the Gryffindor Quidditch team. Afterwards, Harry catches back up with Neville, and as he's explaining how he didn't get expelled and did make the Quidditch team, the two run once more into Malfoy. "You look a lot braver now that you're back on the ground and got your goons with you," said Neville, notioning to Crabbe and Goyle. "Ha! Strong words coming from the boy who always has Potter fight his battles for him. What do you say to a wizard's duel, me and you, tonight? Midnight." "He's in," interrupts Harry before Neville can respond. "I'm his second. Who's yours?" Neville couldn't help but feel that in this moment, Harry was maybe proving Malfoy's point, but also felt so grateful to have a friend that would always have his back. "Crabbe," sneered Draco as the trio sulked off. "How are we going to get out of the castle in the middle of the night?" Neville asked with fear written all over his face. Harry just grinned. Later that night in the dormitory, Harry reveals that his father left him something very special they could use to sneak about the castle. A cloak of invisibility. The plan was simple. The two would wait until everyone else in the dormitory had gone to sleep, then they would sneak out under the invisibility cloak.
My body's gone!
It wasn't long, however, before Neville and Harry realized that Malfoy had set them up. It was well past midnight, and Malfoy was nowhere to be seen. They had just decided to head back to the common room when they heard a noise. "I'll check it out," whispered Harry, slipping out from under the cloak, leaving Neville fully hidden. But the moment Harry rounded the corner, he found himself face to face with none other than Mrs. Norris. "Run!" he whispers to Neville. Neville paused for a moment, but realizing there was nothing he could do, began booking it back towards Gryffindor Tower. Neville didn't see Harry again until the following morning, when he plopped down next to him at breakfast looking as cheery as ever. "Detention," he announced without an ounce of regret. "Apparently I get to spend Halloween in the Forbidden Forest with Hagrid. Cool, huh?" Neville personally did not think this had sounded great. He had been down to visit Hagrid just once since the school year had started, and while he had enjoyed himself, he also found the sight of the monstrous three-headed dog outside of Hagrid's hut that he affectionately called Fluffy to be quite terrifying. Despite Harry's seemingly unfazed mood, he spent the rest of the morning reviewing notes before heading off to Quidditch practice. And with the midnight duel behind them, the next few weeks proceeded without any incident. Neville began to settle into his class schedule and even discovered he had a knack for herbology. It wasn't long at all before the Halloween feast was upon them, and Neville couldn't be more excited. Their coursework had picked up considerably, and between that and Quidditch practice, Neville felt he had been seeing less and less of his new best friend. But even without Harry there, the feast was amazing. Neville sat with the other boys in his year, Ron, Dean, and Seamus, who all spoke excitedly about the first Quidditch match of the year coming up. Gryffindor versus Slytherin. Neville had hoped that Harry would be able to join the feast before it ended, but whatever he was doing in the forest with Hagrid must have taken longer than expected because Harry never showed up. He was just looking at the empty space next to him when the doors to the Great Hall burst open and the caretaker, Mr. Filch, came running down the center aisle. "Murder! Murder!" he shouted. Almost at once, chaos seemed to spread throughout the Great Hall, but Dumbledore stood and called for order. The Great Hall goes calm, and Dumbledore instructs all of the prefects to escort the students back to their dormitories.
Gryffindors, keep up, please, and stay alert!
But as the students exit the Great Hall, there was simply no hiding what Filch had seen. The soaked floors marked the reflection of the words. "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware." "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware." The words glistened in bright red letters on the castle wall, framing the horrible sight of Mrs. Norris the cat suspended in midair. Gasps filled the hall as several teachers, including Dumbledore and a still very flustered Argus Filch, approached the scene. "I want to know who's done this! I want to know who's murdered my cat!" "She is not dead, Argus. Merely petrified," replied Dumbledore as he examined Mrs. Norris up close. Whispers filled the hall as students began to wonder who could have done such dark magic. Professor Quirrell had stepped forward to also examine the cat, but Professor Snape had stepped around him, scanning the crowd, looking for something or someone. His eyes landed on Neville, who suddenly felt quite petrified himself, but then Snape's eyes seemed to relax with, was it relief? "Where's Potter?" he suddenly demanded of Neville, and simultaneously almost the entire crowd began to notice Harry's absence. Before Neville could respond, however, Filch broke in once more. "It was Potter, headmaster," he said, clinging to the hope of an accusation. "Revenge for landing him in detention and missing the feast." "Alas, Argus, as you've just said, Harry was in detention tonight, and therefore could not have done this, nor could any student at this school, as this is highly advanced dark magic." At these words, Quirrell seemed to quiver and back away from the cat. After that, Dumbledore dismissed the crowd back to their dormitories, but despite Dumbledore giving Harry an alibi, rumors began to spread immediately that it was Harry Potter who had attacked Mrs. Norris. When Neville returned to the dorm room, he found Harry sitting alone at the edge of his bed, staring at a picture frame. Hedwig the Toad sat beside him, giving off a faint glow. Which, by the way, can I just say, last week we asked you guys to submit artwork of Hedwig the Golden Toad, and oh my gosh, did you guys ever deliver? We got so many different entries, and they were all so much fun to look at. You guys are seriously all so talented. Thank you so much for your time drawing these, sending them in, and just for watching the series. But anyway, let's get back to it. "Hey, you're back! Thought you would have joined the feast after Hagrid's," said Neville. "Halloween's always a rough day for me. It's the day my parents were attacked. Doesn't really feel like a day to celebrate," said Harry. Surprised to see his normally excitable friend so down, Neville tried to change the subject. "How was Hagrid's? Did you hear about Mrs. Norris?" "Mrs. Norris? No. What happened?" Harry replied. Neville explained all about the attack and how the cat had been petrified and something called the Chamber of Secrets had been opened. "What?" exclaimed Harry. "You know what it is?" asked Neville. "Well, only a little. Apparently it's some hidden chamber at the school where a giant monster lives, but I never thought it was real. Sirius said he and my dad used to go out under the cloak and found loads of secret passages and rooms in the castle, but never came across anything like that. He said they even made a map of it, but Filch confiscated it. That certainly doesn't help this situation, does it?" Harry gave a half-concerned shrug. "Sounds like your dad and your godfather were really good friends," said Neville, looking at the photo Harry had been examining. "The best friends Hogwarts ever saw, to hear him tell it, but it's too weird. I heard a different story about the Chamber of Secrets tonight." "What?" said Neville, looking shocked but very excited. "It was tonight with Hagrid. Apparently the spiders around the castle have been acting really weird, and we were going to investigate the reason. He took me deep into the forest to meet a friend of his, a
giant spider. Hagrid told me he'd been expelled because he was assumed to have opened the chamber nearly 50 years ago. But if he was with you in the forest, it couldn't have been him, right? Neville asked, trying to sound casual at the sound of a giant spider living somewhere off in the forest. He looked more than up to the task of causing some harm, but trust me, there's no way he could have made it into the castle undetected. Could there be other spiders in the castle? Well, Aragog, that was his name, was surrounded by his family, and there were thousands of them. Not as big as him, but some was still bigger than a car. If one had entered the castle as a baby and grown up there, it could be huge now. But Hagrid was trying to figure out why they were acting weird, and he was with you. It couldn't have been him. And why would he attack Mrs. Norris? Don't know. Maybe he was checking with Aragog to see if the plan went like it was supposed to? And he said some of his roosters had been killed recently. Maybe he thinks it was her? The evening had certainly given Neville a lot to think about, and the next morning it seemed like the castle had nothing else to talk about. But as much chatter as there was one prevailing theory as to who did it. Harry Potter. Neville heard many bits of conversation as he worked his way from class to class that day.
Where was he during the feast? I heard he was with that monster lover Hagrid.
What if you know who transferred him his powers when he vanished? Now he's using them to open the chamber.
Filch is the one who gave him detention. You think it's any coincidence it was his cat that was attacked the same night Potter was missing?
Even the teacher seemed to be acting a little bit more on edge than usual, except maybe for Professor Quirrell, who the attack seemed to be acting as a stimulant on. He informed them with uncharacteristic enthusiasm during their next defense against the dark arts lesson that they would be beginning defensive spells immediately, just to be on the safe side. During the class, that Hermione Granger girl also asked Quirrell about what the Chamber of Secrets is and if he knows anything about it, and he tells them the whole story about the founders and Slytherin leaving and the supposed monster that lives there. He even admits to having searched the school himself when he was a student there, hoping to vanquish the monster within, but was unsuccessful in ever locating it, and encourages the rest of the students to report anything unusual they see immediately to him. The rest of the lesson is then teaching the students a basic disarming spell, Expelliarmus. Quirrell separated the class into pairs, and Neville spent the rest of the day trying to disarm Ron Weasley, which to his surprise he was able to do on all but one occasion. Meanwhile, Harry was paired with Hermione Granger, and while at first Harry seemed incapable of missing, by the end of the class Hermione had also gotten the hang of the spell and managed to hit Harry so hard he went flying across the classroom, leaving the rest of the students laughing. As Harry collected himself, Quirrell congratulated the class on their progress with the spell.
Excellent work, Miss Granger. Take 5 well-earned points for Gryffindor. I disarmed her the whole time and she gets 5 points. Well, she's in our house, so in a way you did too, responded Neville.
Harry gave a small tilt of the head and then nodded in agreement. Are you heading to lunch then? Asked Neville.
No, I'm gonna knock out some homework before practice this afternoon,
Harry replied. Given that Harry never needed extra time to work on homework, Neville thought this had more to do with wounded pride than anything else, but decided against pushing the point. So Neville headed off to lunch while Harry followed Hermione to the library. She's always there. Neville was sure Harry would shake off the embarrassment in an hour or two, and so was very surprised when he never showed up for herbology that afternoon. And it turned out to be an excellent class. Since the attack on Mrs. Norris, Professor Sprout had decided to instruct the class about mandrakes, usually a second-year subject, but since their leaves were so vital in the revival of petrified victims, she decided to move it up to first year. What was more surprising than Harry missing the class, though, was that Hermione never showed up either. But Neville and his classmates didn't have to wait long to find out why Hermione had missed class. As they made their way back into the castle, they stumbled upon a horrible scene and collectively gasped. Before them was the ghostly form of Nearly Headless Nick, the Gryffindor ghost, except instead of pearly white, he appeared black and somehow solid, and beneath him lay a petrified Hermione. Several of the class let out screams, and within seconds, teachers were emerging from classrooms to see what was the cause of the commotion. Neville, however, made straight for the common room. He had to find Harry. He'd been studying at the same time as Hermione, and she'd been attacked. What if he had too? And guys, now we need to take a quick pause to thank today's sponsor, MeUndies, which really gives us the perfect opportunity to make an analogy about Neville, because the fact that he was a candidate to be the chosen one in the main story adds a very interesting layer to it. And MeUndies is a celebration of all of the interesting layers of ourselves that not everyone always gets to see. You know, like being chosen as the nemesis to the world's most powerful dark wizard. It's really a perfect analogy for the perfect producer of pants, which is the term for underwear in Britain. And that's MeUndies. They know comfort and subtle style better than anyone. My drawer has been stocked with MeUndies for years now, but I do always find myself gravitating towards my Hogwarts pair, especially during What If weeks, am I right? But it's not just the wizarding world. MeUndies also has prints for all sorts of fandoms. Right now, I'm personally eyeing up these awesome Grogu ones. But big news, MeUndies is now entering the swimsuit era. They have stylish swimwear that are chlorine resistant, UPF 50+ for sun protection, plus they're sustainably sourced and imported under fair working conditions. All excellent things that make me even happier to be a MeUndies customer. So to get 25% off your first order plus free standard shipping, head over to MeUndies.com/theories. And remember, if you're not satisfied, your purchase is on MeUndies. Again, that is 25% off your first order when you head over to MeUndies.com/theories. Link is in the description down below. Once more, Neville returned to the common room to find Harry alone in the dormitory, this time getting ready for Quidditch practice.
You're okay,
cried Neville as he hit the top of the stairs, panting hard. Of course, Harry responded, nodded off for a bit. How are the mandrakes?
A lot better than Hermione. She's been attacked.
What?
But I just saw her. She actually had some tips on defensive spells. That's how she got me in class. She was fine. And not just her, but nearly headless Nick too. I mean, what can harm a ghost?
Harry was immediately on his feet and pacing. Only something really dark, he said, looking paler by the second and fidgeting nervously with his notebook.
This isn't going to look good, Harry, said Neville. Everyone already suspected you, and now Hermione was just attacked an hour after she embarrassed you in Defense Against the Dark Arts. And you were missing from Herbology. Why didn't you just come to class?
Okay, first of all, she didn't embarrass me, and like I said, I nodded off. Anyway, I'm gonna be late for practice. We'll figure it out later. Neville felt very confused. Harry was his best friend, and he was sure he'd never do anything to hurt somebody, but this was the second time there'd been an attack where Harry had been absent for some unknown reason, and on both occasions he seemed to have a motive. Neville also couldn't help wonder about all those rumors floating around about him and Harry as babies. Why had Voldemort disappeared after attacking the Potters? Had Harry somehow absorbed his powers? It turned out Neville wasn't the only one coming to these exact conclusions, and he found that a feeling of uneasiness had fallen over the castle in the coming weeks. Draco Malfoy could be spotted strutting about the castle looking as smug and happy as ever. Rumors of Dumbledore possibly being expelled from the school if the attacks didn't stop swept through the school, and on the whole, most of the students seemed to be collectively keeping their distance from Harry. The Gryffindors at least had the decency to keep any suspicions to themselves, especially after Harry's debut performance as their Seeker, defeating the Slytherin Quidditch team in a mere 3 minutes. Neville might have been upset that his first Quidditch match ever was so short if his best friend hadn't been the hero. The final score had been 160-0, Slytherin's worst defeat in years. Even so, Harry barely felt up for the post-match party. He said it was just because he was exhausted from the game, but since it had only lasted 3 minutes, Neville didn't see how that could possibly be the case. Nonetheless, Neville let his friend head up to the dormitories by himself to get some rest while Neville stayed down and enjoyed the rest of the party. When Neville finally did make it up to the dorms, he had to admit he was absolutely astounded by his friend's dedication to his studies. While everyone else had been downstairs partying, Harry had collapsed and was asleep over one of his books at his desk. Laughing to himself, Neville helped heave Harry onto his 4-poster bed. But he couldn't help but notice that the book Harry had fallen asleep on was completely blank on the inside. Curious, he picked up the book and flipped through the pages and was surprised to find they were all blank. Uncertain what to make of it, he set the book back down on the desk, but as he did so, noticed 3 initials on the back cover. TMR. As he took in the letters, he found he was filled with a similar sinking sensation, which for some reason reminded him of Malfoy. But he shook it off and retired for the evening himself. The next day, sign-ups were announced for anyone who wanted to stay at Hogwarts over the Christmas break. Neville had mixed feelings about whether or not he should sign up. He of course missed his parents, and with all the recent attacks, most of the students were packing their bags. But he had also just experienced the best few months of his life, and the idea of returning home to a place he hadn't been allowed to leave for over a decade was almost as frightening as the petrified victims up in the hospital wing. It had been different before he hadn't known what else was out there. But now, well, I've just signed up to stay for Christmas, announced Harry with a look of excitement in his eyes. We've got to stay, Neville. Empty castle, invisibility cloak, think of the adventures. And that did it. Christmas meant there was no classes and no Quidditch practice, so even Harry couldn't be too preoccupied with his studies. And with the thought of the castle being devoid of whisperers and onlookers, and the thrill of exploring the castle like Harry's father had, Neville was in. He quickly wrote a letter to his parents and sent it along with Treva to explain that he would be staying at Hogwarts for Christmas. Despite the dangerous atmosphere that had settled on the castle, the week leading up to the Christmas holidays turned out to be quite fun. Professor Sprout informed the class that all of the mandrakes had gone into hibernation for the winter, which was a really good sign, and Professor Quirrell hosted a small contest in class to help review the different defensive spells they'd gone over so far. The goal of the contest was to try and disarm your opponent or hit them with the full body bind curse, and in the meantime try and dodge spells or block it with the shield charm. To their absolute pleasure, the final match had come down to Neville versus Harry. Neville thought he had won when he hit Harry with his full body bind curse, but it didn't take all the way and left Harry's arms free for him to cast Expelliarmus, sending Neville's wand sailing across the room. Harry's always good at Expelliarmus. Both boys laughed at the results, and Professor Quirrell even awarded them both 5 points for Gryffindor for the progress they'd made with the spells. He also assured the class that over the Christmas holidays he would be redoubling his efforts to locate the Chamber of Secrets and hopefully catch the culprit. The air in the castle was feeling lighter than it had in weeks, but Neville couldn't help but maintain a level of concern over the attacks and Harry's unusual behavior. The first day of the Christmas holiday was splendid. Snow had fallen over the grounds, and the boys were headed down to Hagrid's, where even Fluffy the 3-headed dog didn't look so dangerous, jumping around in the snow trying to catch snowflakes. Hagrid prepared the boys surprisingly good cups of hot chocolate and equally unappetizing rock cakes. Neville was just unclenching his jaw from one of said rock cakes when Harry asked, Hagrid, what will they do to the person if they find out who's opening the chamber? Hagrid looked alarmed.
Don't know. Expel, probably, of course. No one died yet. That's how I got my job in the first place. Everyone thought it was me. Some thinks it's me again. Think I should be locked up. But, well, Harry, you've seen Aragog. He's not even up at the castle. Not that he'd harm a fly, even if he was.
Sorry again if I went a little pirate there. Harry gave Neville a look which made it clear that he did not agree with the sentiment that Aragog was not dangerous, but didn't challenge Hagrid on it. For some reason, Harry's mood seemed subdued as they headed back up to the castle, but Neville couldn't figure out why. Nonetheless, he tried to cheer up his friend.
Hey, what if we take your dad's cloak out tonight and do some exploring? Maybe see if we can get into the restricted section of the library?
The prospect of adventure and even some light rule-breaking seemed to lift Harry's spirits, and the two immediately began plotting which sections of the castle they'd like to explore. The plan was simple. They just needed to stay up long enough for their fellow Gryffindor, Ron Weasley, who had also decided to stay at the castle for the Christmas break, to fall asleep. Then they would sneak out under the cloak. Unfortunately, it was well past 11 before Ron finally retired from the common room up to the dorms, having stayed up late playing Exploding Snap with his brothers. Neville had actually almost fallen asleep for real by the time Ron's snores began filling the dormitory. As he shook off his sheets, he turned to see if Harry had fallen asleep too, but was alarmed to see Harry fully dressed and standing at his desk, staring at his notebook.
Harry?
Neville whispered, trying not to wake Ron up, but Harry didn't respond or even acknowledge Neville. Instead, he turned and almost robotically exited the dormitory.
Harry, where are you going? You forgot the cloak!
Neville called out, still whispering, but again, Harry ignored him. Unsure what was going on, Neville grabbed the cloak himself and followed Harry out of the common room and into the castle. Despite the lack of the cloak, Harry encountered no resistance from Filch, the teachers, or even any prefects roaming the halls. Neville followed him all the way to the second floor corridor, where he entered, of all places, the girls' bathroom? As Neville approached the door, his foot caught on the cloak and he collided with the door. He thought he'd alerted his presence to Harry, but seemed to be saved by the sound of a girl crying in one of the stalls. Could that be why Harry had come here in the middle of the night? To help the girl? Had Harry just assumed Neville had fallen asleep and decided to explore the castle himself? But then why hadn't he brought the cloak? But if Harry noticed the girl crying, he was ignoring her completely. Instead, he approached one of the sinks on the wall and began whispering to it in a cold, clear, hissing voice. Neville leaned in close, trying as hard as he could to hear what Harry was saying, but couldn't quite make it out. And then, to Neville's absolute astonishment and horror, the sink began to transform until it had opened a doorway, which Harry promptly jumped through. Neville gasped and rushed forward. He couldn't believe what he was looking at. He examined the sink, looking for he didn't know what, but then he saw it. A small snake. And suddenly, he knew exactly what he was looking at. The entrance to the Chamber of Secrets. Neville ran. He didn't know where he was going, he just knew he needed to be far away from that place. That truth, the truth that his best friend was the one opening the Chamber of Secrets and attacking students. And without knowing how he'd ended up there, Neville suddenly found himself alone in the Great Hall. He removed Harry's invisibility cloak and sat staring at his hands, wondering what he should do and how it was even possible. Should he turn Harry in? No, he couldn't get his best friend expelled, but he also couldn't let him keep attacking people.
Care for some company?
Said a voice that caused Neville to cry out in alarm. He looked up to see, of all people, Albus Dumbledore sitting across from him. Certain he was about to be in severe trouble for being out of bed so late at night, he responded dumbly, good evening, sir. I was just looking for a warm beverage to help you sleep. I am sure, responded Dumbledore. No worries, Neville. I myself was just doing the same. Look at Dumbledore making up silly lies for the benefit of students. And at that moment, Dumbledore tapped the table and two large steaming goblets of hot chocolate appeared before them.
I dare say, though, you seem to have taken a seat at the wrong table,
said Dumbledore, looking around. Neville gathered his bearings enough to realize that he had indeed sat at the Hufflepuff table by accident. Feeling as though the threat of punishment seemed to have passed for the moment, though, Neville responded, Sorting Hat almost put me in Hufflepuff, you know? Sometimes I'm not sure I'm brave enough for Gryffindor.
And I'm sure you would have done great in Hufflepuff as well. You're clearly a hard worker and a loyal friend. It seems young Mr. Potter has even entrusted you with his invisibility cloak,
said Dumbledore, motioning to the cloak.
You know about? I knew James Potter, Dumbledore said knowingly. He even lent me that very cloak once. It was I who returned it to Harry's godfather to pass it on to Harry after his father died.
Neville was unsure what to say, so he just sipped his hot chocolate instead.
Sirius was James's best friend. Oh, the trouble they used to get into,
Dumbledore said, seemingly lost in a memory.
Given the chance, I think he would have died for him that night had he been there. It is wonderful that Harry has a friend like you, Neville. The two of you remind me of them very much.
Neville was still unsure why Dumbledore was telling him any of this, and why he wasn't in trouble for being out of bed, but Dumbledore's words were starting to make him feel a little uneasy. He was praising Neville for his amazing friendship with Harry, and what a loyal friend he was, when at that very moment Neville was contemplating turning Harry in for very real crimes. Dumbledore's eyes met Neville's and seemed to pierce right through him.
If you are concerned you do not belong in Gryffindor, Neville, let me say this. In times of doubt, we must remember who the true enemy is. But if you can stand up for what you know is good and true, even in the face of terrible danger, that takes real courage.
Before Neville could respond, and thus far he didn't feel like he'd added much to the conversation at all, a scream could be heard in the distance. Dumbledore turned, and with amazing speed that Neville would not have expected for a man his age, he was across the hall and out the door. Neville grabbed the invisibility cloak, threw it on, and followed Dumbledore through the castle, and on his way realized he was following a familiar path, back to the Gryffindor common room.
Oh no, Harry!
Thought Neville. But no, it wasn't Harry. Outside of the portrait of the fat lady lay Ron Weasley, petrified. Neville, still under the cloak, raced past Dumbledore and up to the dormitory, where he found Harry asleep in his four-poster. How had Harry gotten back to the dormitory? How could he be asleep, and why would he attack Ron? Neville's fear of Harry in that moment was matched only by his rage at what Harry had just done. He didn't know what to do, just that he couldn't be in the dormitory any longer. He spent the rest of the evening down in the common room with Ron's elder brothers, who had been awakened and informed of the attack. A guard had been placed at the portrait hole, but Neville knew it was no good, that the real enemy was asleep upstairs. The real enemy. That is what Dumbledore had just told him down in the Great Hall, and what the note from his grandmother had said when she sent him the Remember All. Remember who the real enemy is. Struck with an idea, Neville threw caution to the wind and rushed up to his dormitory and fished the Remember All out of his trunk. His trouble all year with this particular item had been that any time it grew red and cloudy, he just felt frustrated, unable to remember what he'd forgotten. But now Neville focused all of his energy into the question, who is the real enemy? The orb grew red and cloudy once more. Harry, he wondered in his mind toward the orb, but the clouds continued to swirl inside. Neville concentrated again. Who was the real enemy? Hagrid? Had he actually opened it before? Was he somehow manipulating Harry now? He opened his eyes again, but was unsurprised to find the red smoke still swirling about. He knew it was no good. Hagrid was, as Dumbledore had said, true and good. But then who was it? Did he, Neville, even really have an enemy? And then, as if he'd known it all along, a name appeared in his mind. Voldemort? He opened his eyes and was not surprised to see the smoke had vanished, and he held nothing in his hand but a clear orb. And suddenly, Neville knew what he had to do. "Hey, it's clear!" said a voice from behind him. Harry had awoken and seen the smoke vanish. "Oh yeah," said Neville, ready to confront Harry, but suddenly Harry's appearance caught him off guard. He looked pale, his eyes were watery and red. He looked terrified. "Harry, I need to talk to you. Ron's been attacked, and last night It's me!" burst out Harry. "It's me, Neville. I don't know how, but I'm the one attacking people. I think something's wrong with me. I keep blacking out and waking up, and then someone's attacked." "I forgive you," said Neville, almost at once, the words coming to him without even thinking. "You, what? But you know?" sputtered Harry. "I forgive you. Look, Harry, I already knew it was you. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. I followed you last night. I watched you open the chamber, but it's not you. I know it's not you. It's him, Voldemort. I don't know how, but it is. And I forgive you. You're the best in our year, and my best friend, Harry, and I know you'd never hurt anyone. Except maybe Malfoy," Neville added after a pause. And suddenly both boys were laughing and hugging, and the relief on Harry's face was palpable. "But what do we do? I think it has something to do with that," Harry said, pointing to his notebook. "It talks to me. I write it, and his name is Tom Riddle. He talks back. He's brilliant. He knows so much magic. He's been helping me learn this year, but sometimes I'm writing it and I just go black." "We'll take it to Dumbledore," said Neville. "Maybe he knows who this Tom Riddle is." The two boys set off for Dumbledore's office at once before realizing that they had no idea where it was. Not willing to be deterred, though, they headed for the Great Hall, where breakfast was just being served. Dumbledore was eating at the head table, and the boys rushed forward to try and tell him what they knew. But before they could reach him, a smug-looking man with long, sleek blonde hair and a portly man in a lime green bowler hat entered the Great Hall. "Another attack last night, Dumbledore," said the blonde man. "I'm afraid the governors have voted at once for your removal. We've come to escort you out of the school immediately." "Ah, Lucius, Cornelius, love to see you both on this fine holiday," responded Dumbledore in a tone far removed from someone who has just received news they were being forcibly removed from their position. "Apologies about this, Dumbledore," said the man named Fudge. "Once these attacks are sorted, I'm sure Lucius and the governors will have you reinstated straight away." "If these attacks are sorted, Fudge, if," responded Lucius, looking far happier than Neville felt the occasion warranted. "I dare say it almost sounds as if you hope we don't find the culprit, Lucius," said Dumbledore coolly, but then added, "But that would of course be utter nonsense, as I'm sure the safety of your son Draco and his schoolmates is of the utmost importance to you." Hatred for the man named Lucius seemed to flood through Neville's body as his true identity was revealed, but there was nothing they can do. Dumbledore was being escorted away from the school at that very moment. "I would just like to say," said Dumbledore in a voice that couldn't be described as loud, but carried all the same, "that help
will always be given at Hogwarts to those who ask for it.
Fudge and Malfoy looked curious around the mostly empty hall to see if they could tell who Dumbledore was addressing, but couldn't find anyone. And yet, Neville could have sworn that for the briefest of moments, Dumbledore had locked eyes with him.
But what do we do now? Destroy the diary? Get rid of it?
Asked Harry, looking frantic.
Quirrell, said Neville. He's the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, and he said he's searching the castle, and to let him know if we knew anything that could help. Maybe he can figure out how it works, how to get rid of it.
Harry looked unsure at this idea, and Neville thought he knew why. There had been a certain security in telling Dumbledore, an assurance that all would be understood and forgiven, but how would the other professors react?
We don't have to tell him it's been you doing it, or where the entrance is, said Neville. Just that we found this diary, and it seems dark, and is dated 49 years ago, the same as the last time it was open. That should be enough to go on.
Harry agreed, and the boys set off to find Professor Quirrell, eventually locating him in his office feeding a large iguana. Incidentally, a completely non-magical creature, as far as I know.
Oh, hello, boys. What can I do for you?
He asked. And together they explained about the diary and their suspicions, with Quirrell listening with rapt attention the entire time.
Well, boys, I am impressed. I would be happy to look into this. In fact,
he turned to pick something up out of the trunk and surfaced again with a small device in the shape of a top.
This is a sneakoscope. It detects untrustworthy behavior, usually very unreliable at the school with so many students running about. I had to finally put it away after your friend Ron's older brothers began attending the school, although that was back when I taught Muggle studies.
He trailed off. Harry and Neville looked eagerly at the device.
Anyway, the castle is pretty empty now, so if we just give it a spin here, it should be able to tell us if it detects any dark magic from the...
But he'd been cut off by an ear-splitting whistle emitting from the device. His eyes grew wide, and he immediately scooped it up and silenced it.
That is quite telling,
Quirrell whispered, almost to himself.
I think you have found something here. Thank you for turning it into me. You've done the right thing, boys. I shall see what I can glean from it, and hopefully we can put all of this nasty business behind us.
And feeling lighter than they had in weeks, Harry and Neville exited Quirrell's office and headed back to their dormitories. Indeed, with the diary behind them and the prospect of Christmas just a few days away, everything seemed much more enjoyable. Okay, question for you guys. What do you think Harry and Neville got each other for Christmas? Also, while we're talking about the winter break, I feel like this is a great time to show off all of the Fluffy in the Snow artwork we got last week because, oh my gosh, it was so amazing. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to draw it. Three-headed dogs, really hard to draw. I kept trying to get like one of those AI bots to give me a cool drawing of a three-headed dog in the snow, and it could not figure out what I wanted. It was so frustrating. So thank you guys for sending in so many. The rest of the winter holiday went off without a hitch. Harry seemed to be completely back to his old self, and the boys felt confident in the safety of the school now that the diary had been given to Quirrell. However, when the students arrived back for the spring semester, it was obvious that the news of Ron's attack and Dumbledore's departure from the school had spread far and wide. Many students, Neville found out, had not bothered even returning at all. It seemed some families had been imagining a layer of security around their own children because they weren't Muggle-born and thus not likely to be considered enemies of the heir. But now that Ron Weasley, a pureblood, had been attacked, all bets were off. And yet, as more time passed, Neville felt more and more certain of everyone's safety. Not a single attack occurred in the first month. And one day in early February, Professor Sprout informed them that the mandrakes were nearly ready to be harvested and that they could soon revive all the victims of petrification. This made Harry very nervous, as he was very concerned about being found out as the attacker, but Neville assured him that once everyone was revived and that Dumbledore had a chance to hear what everyone had to say, he would totally be in the clear. After all, even Professor Quirrell had seemed certain that the diary Harry had been carrying around all year was full of dark magic and more likely to be responsible for the attacks than Harry himself. That said, it didn't seem Quirrell had yet solved the mystery of the diary, and Neville wasn't sure if he was imagining it, but it seemed his defense against the dark arts professor was getting paler and paler by the week. Neville and Harry didn't have time to worry about Quirrell, though. The next Quidditch match of the year was coming up, and Harry was determined to make a repeat performance that he could enjoy properly this time. This meant he and Neville were heading down to the Quidditch pitch every day so that Harry could get in some extra practice. Neville still wasn't great on a broom, but he was certainly good enough to float in place and throw golf balls for Harry to go chasing after, and he was impressed how Harry almost never missed a catch, no matter which direction he threw the balls. When the day of the next match arrived, Gryffindor versus Hufflepuff, Neville was very confident about Harry's chances. It wasn't just Harry's extra practice, but one of Hufflepuff's best chasers had been kept home by his parents who were afraid of the attacks, and the Weasley twins seemed more determined than ever to get a win as a show of support for their brother Ron. Nonetheless, though, Hufflepuff started the match much stronger than Slytherin and managed to put up 40 points to Gryffindor's 10 in the first 15 minutes of play. Twice, Neville saw Harry dive for the snitch, only for the Hufflepuff seeker to cut him off and cause him to lose sight of it. And now Neville was watching in horror as a blur of yellow shot towards the center of the field. The Hufflepuff seeker had clearly seen the snitch and was racing towards it. Harry was on the opposite end of the field, but Harry had noticed what Neville had noticed and was now shooting towards the center as well. Harry looked to be gaining ground, but it was impossible to tell who would get there first. It looked like the two seekers were about to collide. Then, suddenly, at the last moment, the snitch switched directions and flew straight up into the sky. Both seekers swerved to miss each other, then pulled their brooms up to continue the pursuit. Hufflepuff had began their ascent sooner, but Harry was lighter and faster and was gaining ground quick, but was it fast enough? They both reached out, but Harry kicked off his broomstick, going completely airborne, and grabbed it. His broom caught up with him just in time for Harry to catch it again and save him from plummeting down to the field. He held the snitch aloft. Gryffindor wins! Sorry, you know how to get a Quidditch match in there, though. Cheers erupted around the stadium as the teams landed on the ground. Party in the common room! Shouted one of the twins as they hoisted Harry into the air. Neville couldn't remember feeling happier as the crowd made its way back up to the castle. Gryffindor was in the lead for the House Cup. His best friend had just won his second Quidditch match, and there hadn't been an attack in a month. But as the Gryffindors made their way through the second floor corridor, they came to an abrupt halt. There, in red writing above the words, "Enemies of the air beware," was a new message. "His body will rot in the chamber forever." Panic broke out at once. Who had been taken into the chamber? The entire school had been at the match, hadn't it? The answer to that question came within the hour. All of the students had been ordered back to their common rooms, and Professor McGonagall had arrived to announce that the rest of the school year had been cancelled, and that none other than Professor Quirrell had been taken into the chamber. Harry and Neville looked at each other with terror on their faces. It was their fault. They had given Professor Quirrell the diary, and now he was going to die in the chamber. Not only that, but Neville was going to have to return home, possibly forever if the school wasn't reopened. He couldn't return to that life, not now that he knew what he'd been missing. Never go to Hogwarts again, never see another Quidditch match, never see Harry? We've got to do something. We're the only ones who know where the chamber is, said Neville to Harry. We got Quirrell into this mess, and now we have to get him out. But what can we do? Asked Harry. Shouldn't we tell someone? McGonagall or... No, we can't endanger anyone else. The last teacher we told about it is about to die. Look, Harry, I know this sounds crazy, but somehow I think it's supposed to be us. Harry didn't need any more convincing. I'll get the cloak. We'll go tonight.
Go down the trapdoor. Tonight.
/ trap sink. As night fell, the two boys snuck out of the common room once more and made their way to the second floor bathroom. Once inside, Neville showed Harry the sink where he'd seen Harry open the chamber once before. Who's there? Yelled a girl's voice from one of the stalls. Neville and Harry both jumped, but calmed down when they saw the ghost of a girl floating out from one of the stalls to greet them. You're Moaning Myrtle, said Harry. I've heard of you. Didn't you die in this bathroom? These were apparently not the right words to say to Myrtle, who immediately dissolved into a pool of tears. Wait, sorry about that, said Neville. It's just, we think the entrance to the Chamber of Secrets is in this bathroom. You must be in here all the time. Do you know anything about it? This seemed to have the desired effect, and Myrtle stopped sobbing. I just remember a large something coming out of the sink over there, and a boy telling it to stare me in the eyes. It was the last thing I ever saw before I died. Neville and Harry exchanged looks. Okay, well, whatever's down there, don't look it in the eyes, said Neville. Do you think you can open it again? What? Asked Harry. I don't know how to open it. I can't remember anything from when I was blacked out. Oh, right, said Neville, thinking fast. Well, I remember you standing here, and you whispered some kind of hiss at it. It sounded like a snake or something. Can you remember how it sounded? Can you do it again? Asked Harry. Maybe, said Neville, rather unsure of himself, but feeling he had nothing to lose, began making hissing noises at the sink. It took several minutes of trying, but eventually, and much to Neville's surprise, the sink began to transform once again into the entrance of the Chamber of Secrets. Well done, Neville, said Harry excitedly. I'll go first. And with that, Harry jumped through. From there, the two boys made their way through a series of tunnels. At some point, Neville had to hiss at another door to get it open, but eventually they found it. The Chamber of Secrets. Before them stood a large underground atrium, lined on both sides with statues of huge snake heads. And there at the other end lay... Quirrell! The boys yelled out. Rushing to their professor's side, things looked grim. He looked paler than ever, and after checking his pulse, they found his heart was barely beating. He won't answer you, said a cool voice from the shadows. The boys looked up to see a handsome boy in Slytherin robes walking toward them. Tom, what's going on? What happened to him? How are you down here? Asked Harry. Good to see you again, Harry. Am I to assume this is your friend, Neville Longbottom, the one you've been writing about? His eyes settled on Neville, looking hungry, and Neville thought he saw a flash of red behind them. I'm Neville, said Neville, trying to sound braver than he felt. Then your professor has served his true purpose, said Tom, a real hint of excitement rising in his voice. I knew you couldn't resist coming to save him. Knew from everything Harry told me you wouldn't risk the school closing, returning to your hidey hole forever. It would have been safer, though, Tom trailed off. It's been you, Neville said. You've been controlling Harry, but I thought the true enemy... Voldemort! How dare you speak that name? Shouted Tom. I suppose you think yourself brave, just as this worthless professor did. Yes, I was the one controlling Harry, telling him where the chamber was, how to open it, carrying out the noble work of Salazar Slytherin. But it was all just to get your attention, Neville. Me? Said Neville nervously. Yes, the entire year, my real target has been you. I thought I had you at Christmas. The school was empty. You and Potter were nearly alone. I instructed him to bring Slytherin's monster to your common room to strike you down. Instead, we ran into that Weasley boy out looking for you two. Pathetic. But why me? I don't even know you. I've never known anyone until this year. And why is that, Neville? It's because you've been hiding.
from me, hiding where Dumbledore thought you would be safe. But look at the great Dumbledore now, driven away from the castle by the mere memory of me.
Dumbledore will never really be gone, not as long as there are those who recognize what is good and true, shouted Neville. And at these words, a flash of fire appeared in the air, and a large red bird swooped down, dropping into Neville's hands the sorting hat? Tom cackled in amusement.
Does that mean you're Voldemort? Said Harry, taking a step in front of Neville. But he's gone. He's been gone for 10 years. At last you realize the truth, Potter. Very good, yes. I am Lord Voldemort.
As he said this, he scratched the letters of his name in the air, Tom Marvolo Riddle, which rearranged themselves to spell the same sentence he just spoke.
The Dark Lord never fell, though, Potter. He's been waiting. I've been waiting this whole time for him, he said, motioning to Neville. The boy with the power to defeat the Dark Lord. Well, we'll see about that.
The what? Said Harry and Neville together.
My true self opened this chamber 49 years ago. He's been looking for you for the last 10 years, Neville, waiting for you to come to this school where Dumbledore thought you would be safe. But he knew once you were here, he could attack you with this, Tom said, holding up the diary. With me, which is to say, him. He concealed in this diary a version of his 16-year-old self. He's been writing in the diary for the last 10 years, telling me about the hunt for Neville Longbottom and how I was to destroy him, how he would send the diary to the school with the Malfoy boy, how I was to manipulate him and destroy you.
Neville suddenly remembered meeting Malfoy on the train and the book he was holding, the sinking sensation he'd felt when they shook hands.
But he lost it, and to my surprise, Harry Potter, your new best friend, found it instead, and he began writing to me. It was perfect. I was closer to you than I ever could have hoped. But then you got wise, gave me over to him, he said, motioning towards Quirrell. Quirrell here has been seeking glory all year long, all his life, really. I promised it to him, how badly he wanted to find the chamber, to vanquish the monster within. I led him right to it, and glorified he will be, for in just moments all the life shall drain out of him and into me. I shall be reborn and finish what my monster, my basilisk, has failed to do all year.
Simultaneously, Harry and Neville reacted, pulling out their wands and yelling,
Petrificus Totalis! Expelliarmus!
The spells collided and created an unusual effect, or maybe it was just that Tom wasn't fully formed again yet. Tom's wand shot towards the ground while his body slowly began freezing, but it wasn't fast enough. His face looked livid as he began snarling and hissing instructions at a tall statue behind him. Suddenly, the statue's mouth opened, and from within, a huge snake, the basilisk, emerged.
Don't look at its eyes!
Harry yelled. He fired another Expelliarmus at the snake, but it had no effect. The snake turns towards Neville. Neville, seeing there was nowhere to run, attempted to cover his eyes with the hat in his hand. He shoves it over his head. From beneath, he could see the shadow of the basilisk approach them. But then, the bird! It had reappeared and was pecking away at the snake's eyes.
Well done, bird!
Yelled Harry.
Neville, it's blind!
I like that they don't know who Fox is. Neville removed the hat, but as he did, noticed something hard and heavy land on his head. He reached up and was surprised to find a huge silver sword with rubies glistening in the handle.
Whoa!
Neville said. Looking up, Neville saw the basilisk had turned its attention towards Harry, who'd been throwing rocks at it to distract it. But now Harry had nowhere to go. The snake lunged. Neville ran towards the snake, sword drawn.
Protego!
Shouted Harry. The shield charm burst apart as the basilisk collided with it, and the resulting force sent Harry's wand spiraling away from him. There was nowhere else to go. The basilisk lunged again for Harry, but sink! Neville threw all of his weight behind the sword, shoving it straight up through the basilisk's mouth and into its brain. The basilisk recoiled in agony before finally falling over. Dead.
No!
Tom shouted. The effects of the bodybind curse had worn off, and he was on his feet again with his wand.
But no, it's better this way, of course. It had to be me. I should be the one to do it. There's no one to save you now, Longbottom.
Harry was on his feet. He threw himself in front of Neville. If you want to get to Neville, you'll have to go through me, he shouted.
Stand aside, Potter. There's no reason for you to die as well. Your half-blood is worthless, but you've proven a wonderful servant this year. You may still be of some use to the Dark Lord.
Never! Harry shouted back.
I'll never let you kill my best friend! Have it your way, then. Avada Kedavra!
Time seemed to stand still. Neville tried to shove Harry out of the way, but Tom's spell was too fast. The jet of green collided with Harry, lifting him into the air for the briefest of moments before he collapsed on the ground in front of Neville. Dead.
Oh, didn't see that coming, did you?
Harry!
Neville shouted. He dropped his sword, dropped his wand, dropped to his knees, shaking Harry, trying to shake him back to life. It could not be true. Harry could not be dead.
And now, to finish what I, the greatest wizard in the world, started 10 years ago, to kill the boy they said could defeat me. Well, there was nothing special about you after all, was there?
Neville stood. He was defenseless. He did not know what Voldemort was talking about, but he knew he had lost. He knew there was no escape, but also knew he would not die on his knees. He would die like his friend, standing against the true enemy. Tom pointed his wand directly at Neville's chest.
Avada Kedavra.
And then everything went black. Neville awoke in the hospital wing he didn't know how many days later. He looked around and saw that he had a pile of cards and candy on the nightstand next to him, and at the end of his bed sat Dumbledore.
Good afternoon, Neville,
he said casually, as if Neville had not just awoken from the dead. Or was he? Hello, Professor. Where am I? Am I dead?
Oh, no, Neville, my boy, you are not dead. You are very alive, and I cannot tell you how proud of you I am.
But alive? Neville's mind thought racing. Harry, is he okay? Is he alive too, then? I thought he died in the chamber. Dumbledore sighed. It seemed he had hoped to avoid this particular point, at least for a few minutes.
Harry, I am afraid Neville did not survive the encounter with Lord Voldemort.
But it was the same spell. Tom Riddle, did you catch him? Did he get away?
Tom Riddle is gone, or at least that part of him is gone. Neville, what happened in the chamber is truly unique, and so I can only guess as to what happened, but here is what I have been able to piece together. You and Harry shared a great friendship, as great as any as I've ever seen pass through these halls. He loved you like a brother, Harry, much the way his own godfather loved James Potter. And a bond like that is not so easily defeated. Let me ask you, did Tom offer to spare Harry's life?
Yes, he said he would be a useful servant and that he didn't need to die.
Ah, said Dumbledore. This is ancient magic, Neville. Magic at its very deepest level. By sacrificing himself for you, Neville, even though he need not have died, Harry provided you with the most powerful kind of protection one wizard can give another. Love.
Love? Said Neville uncertainly.
Yes, Neville, love. If I am not mistaken, Voldemort attempted to kill you with the killing curse. It is usually, and by all accounts, unblockable, unsurvivable. It leaves no trace and kills instantly. But in dying for you, it appears Harry has allowed you to break the rules, as you two are always so prone to doing, he said with a wink. Not only did you survive the curse, but it seems to have backfired upon Voldemort, destroying him in the process, and while it usually fails to leave any mark at all, it seems you've been left with a rather unique scar. He motioned to Neville's chest. Neville looked down to discover what appeared to be a thunderstorm's worth of lightning scarred across his chest. I mean, way cooler than one bolt, right? What about Professor Quirrell? Quirinus, I am sad to report, did not survive the night either. Tom Riddle successfully drained him of all of his life, just in time for you to destroy him in turn.
Neville looked down. Something else was bothering him still.
Professor, Tom said I was the boy with the power to destroy the Dark Lord. That was why my family was in hiding. What did he mean? Alas, Neville, I think this is a question for another day, but for now, may I suggest you focus on some of these sweets from your many admirers?
Dumbledore said this as he unboxed the chocolate frog card in front of Neville.
Ah, how fitting, he said, examining the card and tossing it to Neville. First you pull his sword from the hat, and now his card from the box. A true Gryffindor indeed.
Neville stared down at the picture of Godric Gryffindor staring up at him, the very same card Harry had given him when they met on the train. Neville didn't know how yet, but he knew someday he would pay Harry back the favor of saving his life and defeat Voldemort once and for all. And that is what would happen if Neville was the chosen one. Guys, thank you all so much for watching this series. It has been an absolute blast writing and watching it all come together. I will say that for the moment, this is where we are going to end it. I know many of you are probably very eager to find out how the rest of the story unfolds, how Neville will defeat Voldemort, and I must admit, so am I. So I'm not saying we won't return to this story at some point. I just don't know right now when that will be. As we were writing this, it became very obvious to us that the real question we were answering was, how would Neville become the chosen one? How would Voldemort mark him if he had settled on Neville instead of Harry? However, if you're interested in hearing me and Ben get really into the weeds about developing the story and writing it and watching it come together, we are going to be doing a commentary over on our Patreon page. That's patreon.com/SuperCarlinBrothers. We're going to talk about all the paths we didn't take, maybe answer some of your questions like, what about the Sorcerer's Stone, or the Mirror of Erised, or Dobby, or Snape? Like, what happened to all of them? I know we didn't cover every single little detail, but we are going to get into all the little obstacles that we encountered and all the paths we could have taken. If you want to go check that out, it's for the $5 and up tier. It's a great way to support the channel, so thanks in advance. But seriously, one more time, thank you so much for watching this. It has been a true labor of love over the last month, piecing it all together, and it means the world to me that you guys tune in week after week to watch how the story unfolds. But otherwise, until next time, Ben, I will see you in another life.